Okay, so we are going to talk about leadership and how it relates to questions. I want to introduce Gary Cohen, managing partner, founder of CO2 Coaching. Hello, Gary.
Hello. You said I created it. I actually think I unveiled it. I think
There you go.
it was there. Other people have been doing this for years, and it was putting a name to it, a
Mm.
framework that makes it easier for other people to discover what other people just intuitively knew what to do.
Yeah, nice. You put language to and created a model, and as we all know, all models are imperfect, and some models are useful. And isn't it great that we get to show and use this both from a leadership and even for those who are in the coaching world? Like this is useful for you too. Okay,
So
so
what are we going to do today?
well, we're going to start with this idea of how you, if you're watching us, can participate. First of all, we're going to go through this model. We're going to talk about why it matters and how we're going to use it so that you can apply it first thing tomorrow morning or even this afternoon. Before we do that, just so you hear this, if you're watching live, you are more than welcome to share your questions, your comments, your thoughts, things that are helping you or you're curious about. Put them in the chat of this LinkedIn Live because Gary and I are going to be able to see those, and we'll try to our best to answer your questions. Okay. One thing I will just add as we get into this experience today is um, in some ways, the why of this is also in my head. It kind of unlocked something for me. I discovered the why of this when Gary first laid this model out for me years ago, and there's something really kind of beautiful about the why of it. So let's just start with that. Why does it matter that we should be asking more and better questions? And the reality is that every one of us got rewarded in school and promoted often at work because we knew answers. We could raise our hand and say yes, it's 13 or it's 52 or it's the division of powers. I don't know, whatever the answer was, we knew we could answer it. And
What do
Gary,
you think? What do you think about that? Like because as a kid,
mm,
you have a young one at home. Like,
yeah, yeah.
what happens? Like, we are like these questioning machines.
Right. And we know that some parts of education shut that down, right? Because the grading happens, and some parts of the system is that it's useful to know who's got the answer, who remembers it. Increasingly, I think you're right. I noticed that when I'm in an argument with my daughter, it's because she's got an answer that I think is wrong, and it's because we're neither of us is asking a question, right? And having the answer does solve some problems, right? You get to the answer faster, things look cleaner in work settings, of course, and often more gets done initially, right? So there's a way that, like, as we're contributing early on in our career, that works. And yeah, go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, so I was wondering what goes on within us, within you, when you give the answer. You're the boss now. You've moved from school, and there's what is it in us that really um, becomes generative about why we move away from questions to this telling.
Yeah, I mean, in my head, the answer is it feels good to have the answer, right? There's a sort of dopamine hit. Our brain loves it. And of course, there's often an expectation, real or unconscious, amongst the people around us that as a leader, we're supposed to have the answer, right?
Okay, so we're sitting around a table, a conference room, right, having our meeting, and the young executive has the answer for us.
Mm.
What's going on in everybody's head around that person? Like, they're early in their career, they have the answer. We're thinking, what?
I don't know. Maybe that they're great. They should promote them. Yeah,
That's what I'd be thinking. Like,
yeah,
wow, this
yeah,
person's sharp, right?
yeah,
And so we do. We promote that person, and we keep promoting that person until the point of what?
yeah. we run out of opportunities because life gets more complex. Let's go to the next slide and I'll talk about that.
Okay.
So it doesn't work eventually because life gets more complex. The having the answer doesn't work because at some point you can't have the answer. There's just too much complexity to it, right? The system you're working with is big and unknowable enough that there's just no way for any one person to have the answer. Often because there's no clear right answer, right? And so we're stuck in this system that says, well, I'm supposed to know. That's in my head anyway. I'm supposed to know. And I can't really know. And so often leaders, in our experience, both at CO2 and prior to CO2, we notice that leaders are struggling because they end up essentially just giving answers often for the only reason of that's the only way they know how to operate. Um,
And
I know
people
you've seen that
wonder
too.
around this whole topic around accountability because at this moment, what's
Mm,
happening is when the leader is giving the answer,
mm.
they are letting the person off the hook,
Yeah,
right? They let them off the hook. And I bring this up because we're writing a
right,
book called
right.
Off
On
the
the
Hook,
hook.
on the
Yeah,
hook. And
yeah.
so when we ask the question and then we don't validate it for the
Mm,
person,
mhm,
we actually hook them and they
mm.
actually carry that accountability with them because they have to figure it out. And I always say the quickest way between 2 points is the other person's way,
Mm.
not your own way.
Yeah, there's just you're going to get more done that way. So there's
Yeah.
two parts, two benefits. We'll talk more about the benefits as we get into this model a little bit more. Um, and very likely, you as a leader, if you've done any leadership work, both in your professional and personal life, and everybody's a leader in their personal life at some level, you've noticed that there's a problem with always having the answer, not just because sometimes you're wrong, but also you might lose accountability to Gary's point. It might be the case that you're going to lose buy-in from someone else because they're trying to implement your answer, which again doesn't always work. And I know, Gary, you've got examples, hundreds of them, but I know you had an example specifically about um, a leader in a very complex situation without perfect information who came with the answer. Why don't you share that
Yeah,
example with
so
us?
this story could be told so many different times in my coaching career where
Mm,
the answer's already in the room, right?
mhm,
It's already there.
mhm,
And either the hearing or listening deeply isn't, or the asking of the question to get to the listening isn't. And
mhm,
so this story is an organization that um, was innovating in software. They decided that this one leader of the team said, we should outsource it. It's going to cost about $1.5 million, $2 million, and we can get the coding done that way. And two of the executives quickly chimed in and said, this isn't going to work for us. And the CEO said, nope, let's make it happen. And so they outsourced it. They came back to this and they did a post-mortem and they decided, you know, not such a good idea. Why did we waste this money? Why did we take this direction? And the leader said, I think it was that, two people saw that this wasn't the right way. And instead of asking, what is it you see that we don't?
mhm,
They just went forward with a direction. And you could say that, well, we're backing into this in our presenting, like this is a story that just works, right? Um, this leader knows this model and uses it often. And so when they were evaluated, they said, we were too into telling, not enough into asking. And this is the question that would have changed that. We wouldn't have spent the money, we wouldn't have wasted the time. So by going deeper into what question should we be exploring because there's dissidence in the room, you can actually unlock that dissidence and perhaps make clearer decisions as a team.
Yeah. So I want to just stop there for 1 second. So we at CO2, we're a leadership coaching organization, and we're doing development of leaders that are often, almost exclusively, really finding themselves in complex situations where it's hard to have a single or known answer. That's just not simple, right? They're living in unpredictable worlds and systems that are large and complex. And the reality is that we want them to ask more questions to begin with, partly just out of the like, you will get more information if you ask more. And there's a limit to that, right? There's a way that just asking lots more questions doesn't necessarily work. And this is where the beauty of the model comes in, right? So um, first of all, a key word here is just be more curious, right? Be open to being impacted, and try to let go of knowing, right? So there's a way that, just as a starting point, before we even get into this model, we can all probably use a reminder. Okay, if I'm going to be asking more questions, I have to start with the assumption that I don't have all the answers. And again, that's hard. That's not easy for many leaders who've gotten promoted by having them. But just starting there, then I want to kind of talk us through and look through this model, because the simplicity of it and the kind of beauty of the simple form of this, it just continues to wow me. So this model is. Go ahead, Gary. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say what we found in our research early on was there's two factors to readiness to
Mm,
ask, right?
mm,
One is trusting the other, because
mm.
there's really no point in asking, right? If you can't trust the other person. So, how does that one strike you?
I love it. I mean, in some ways, I can sort of hear my own question with my clients around, well, do you trust them to do it? And if the answer is, well, then we're gonna have a hard time asking them what we should do or how we should go forward. We're gonna just keep providing answers. What's the other one?
I just had a senior moment.
Oh,
Yeah, of what the other one was.
the
It's
trust,
trust, and the other readiness factor is any moment.
ability to let go of knowing. Is
Thank
it that
you.
one?
It
Yeah.
is it
Okay.
is the not it is the not knowing.
Right.
It's and what we found was that people can't often make that leap all at once. Okay, so you can't go from I know the answer to I don't know the answer and hold it truthfully. So what we found was bridging it part way, and you go, I know the answer, so I'm going to go midway and say, I know, but I'm going to pretend I don't. Okay.
Mm,
But then
okay.
you start to realize as you start to use the model of asking questions more, that you can get to a place of seeing that other people have different answers and
Mm,
that yours isn't the only answer. So you can actually get to, and I don't know. I will tell you, this is really frustrating to people. Like
mm,
you and I had a
right.
whole dance around this for a couple of years, as I
Yeah.
recall. My kids had this dance too, which is, come on, what do you mean you don't know? You're an expert in this area. And so getting to that place and having people accept that you really have let go of needing to know,
Mm,
right? Other than getting them to evolve in their knowing about the subject that they need to know.
mm, yeah. So a leader who's really, really ready for this sort of leadership has both done the work to move on that spectrum from I know the answer to at least I can pretend I don't know the answer. If not, I can just fully let go of knowing. And they acknowledge that they have people that they can trust well enough to come with their own ideas and answers, right?
Yes. And there's going to be a conflict for people who are listening to us because
Great.
the assumption is, why should we even trust you guys if you've let go of your knowing, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
clearly telling us there's a way to be, right? And what I will offer up is we're not trying to lead right now. We're trying to teach. We're trying to be coaches. And that's a very different role than leading because sometimes you actually have the answer and you should be the teacher.
And the idea and the distinction is often in a leadership situation, having the answer can still be done with questions. You can help people sort of get there with the question. So in the peak model, as you'll see, there's four different kinds of questions, sort of subsets, so, domains, I might call them, along two different axes. And the reality is every question can be categorized on each of those axes. Let's go to that next slide here to get us to think about if you ask a question, you're very likely either trying to gather more information or move us into action, right? The questions can be sort of sorted on that axis and can also be sort of categorized around, are we trying to open up conversation or ideas, or are we trying to narrow things down? Are we trying to diverge the ideas or converge the ideas?
So, what was crazy about this, John, was
Yeah.
that what happened was I sent out to all these people when I wrote my book, Just Ask Leadership. What are the best questions you ask? And these are really phenomenal leaders who had great track records, and they came back with their answers. And I thought, how clever of us that we came up with this peak model: perspective, evaluation, action, and knowledge. And, it goes with our whole mountain theme. So, isn't
Worked
this
out.
great? Like it
Yeah.
all works. And this was pre AI, so we didn't have it to build our acronym for us.
Right.
So, but what happened was all the questions landed in the quadrants.
Mm.
They weren't on the axes. They were actually two-footed. And I saw who was participating today. And I have to say, I borrowed from Ellen Weber this notion of having a two-footed question. And the
Mm.
two-footedness is, if you're the director, right? What are you doing? It's evaluation and action. Or
Right.
the innovator, it's action and perspectives. And we're going to talk about each one of these. But that was the huge aha. The bigger aha came a couple of years later when I recognized I was giving a speech, and that literally, if one has a style like mine is Innovator, I'm missing out on 75% of the questions because I am so dominant in one quadrant. That means when I walk into a room and ask my questions, the most likely place is where my style sits. And we have an assessment that actually will let you figure out what your style is, and it's free. You can do it individually or as a 360.
Mhm. And the other big, in fact, I was around for this. The other big kind of noticing is as leaders and as especially even as coaches, when we're using and are aware of this model, there's often a preference for where to start and how to move through it. So often, maybe not always, but often when we're presented with a new situation, we want to start with professor questions. They will open up new perspectives and help us gain more knowledge. They're there in that two-footed model, like Gary said. They're going to present us with a whole host of stuff for us to sort through. From there, we want to start moving towards innovator questions, right? Things that will get us into more action while also getting us uh, opportunities for different kinds of action or different kinds of perspectives. Often from there, we're going to then go to evaluating all of those ideas, sort of figure out which of those are the best ideas, which gives us more knowledge and helps us sort and converge towards a single idea or a solution that we want to move forward, which then leads us to director, which of course is what are we going to do and by when and who and all of that, right?
We have to do a shout out though, because Tom
Yeah.
Schlick, one of the coaches at CO2, was the one who saw this pattern arise as we started training all of the coaches on this model. And he
Mhm.
said, this is what I'm finding keeps happening. And I ever since he said it, it was like how we call it the Z method, right? Which is you go through the model as a Z, and you wind up using all the questions in a very patterned way. But as you said, John, it's contextual.
Right. So sometimes you're going to be presented with the problem that's we already know all of the various things we could do. We're jumping to judge, right? What should we do with what information we have? I will say it's contextual, and interestingly, back to your point about style or preference, there's a way that that I see, because I do most of my work is with leadership teams. What I notice is that though you want a variety of preference of styles in the room so that we make sure we aren't missing some of these, right? And for example, it is not uncommon for in a team setting for us to forget professor or an innovator and get right to the judgment, right? Like, all right, well, we clearly know all of this, all the information. And then when I'm there and happen to just say something like, what else don't we know about what we're discussing here, or some version of a professor question, what I notice is that the room has a reaction to that. Might be negative, might be positive, but often if that's missing, if we haven't done that work or really given ourselves credit for doing the innovator work to say what could we do with that information, we discover that we get to the decider and so a director level things far too quickly, and make mistakes. Yeah,
You're making me recall
yeah,
uh, a time in which we were meeting as a management team,
yeah,
and that everybody was using three-quarters of the questions,
right,
and that I had started going like, why can't we break through? Why can't we break through in my own head? So I started writing down what the questions were in the quadrants and found that we were missing an entire quadrant. And then when we started asking those questions in the quadrant that was missing,
yeah.
all of a sudden it was a breakthrough for us. And, it's really hard for us as coaches to see this happening live with clients because, we're describing how to do it and then they come back with feedback. But this was one where we got to see it live for ourselves, playing out. And it was just so powerful that oftentimes what's blocking the team is that perhaps there isn't anybody who has a dominance in one of these styles, and therefore it's missing in the room. And if you don't work at figuring out what's there and what isn't there, you might be missing an entire set of questions.
And before we switch off the slide, one other point we made, I think this came from you, Gary, maybe it was Tom, but we were discussing this a while back. We noticed that whatever your preference, so mine is somewhere between professor and innovator. That's where mine were right in the middle, but closer to professor. And as soon as I learned this model and heard this idea, it became clear, if I can get myself to a director question, I open up the possibility for innovator and judge very naturally.
Yeah.
And so, like, noticing your preference, and then which, because the opposite of your preference. So for example, if my professor style, my preference for style for professor leads me to be cautious, or maybe not want to jump to director things. And what I notice is that when especially even just with a one-on-one coaching client, when I'm able to say, okay, what will you do, and how will we know, and what data will you collect, or some director style question, when I get there, the coaching changes. They're like, ooh, this is missing. And if I get there too soon, if they're sort of not ready for that, very naturally we'll backtrack to, oh, we have to come up with more ideas, innovator, or we have to sort of judge those ideas, right? And so that sort of preference thing can really help unlock you and your own sort of style, so that you're not living in only 25% of the possible questions out there. All right,
It,
go ahead,
well,
Gary. Yeah.
before we move on, it's important for people because when you see a framework, you often say, "What's that framework like?" Like Myers-Briggs or DISC or whatever.
Yeah.
Unlike those, we don't say you're stuck in these. Like it's behavioral. You just have to know that the model's out there. There's different questions to ask and start asking them. And once you do, you're going to start seeing these styles in other people. Like you can quickly identify somebody by their style without an assessment. It's that easy because you'll see that most of the questions come from one of the quadrants.
Yeah. And then giving yourself or whoever you're with permission to ask the other half. In fact, without knowing it, if you're a leader of a large team, very likely there are very natural ways that you're asking the opposite questions from the person who you're working with in some of these settings. Okay, so let's talk about professor and just go through the four styles just to give you a sense of what these might sound like. And Gary, along the way, if you've got specific examples or stories you want to tell about them, feel free. I'll just start with this one because, again, this is the place we would typically start, and it is my preference. So I find my style goes here very naturally. What we're trying to do is pull out, and what I'm often doing is pulling out what's already in the room, right? Like what other ideas are floating in my client or the team I'm working with's heads? What's here? What do we know about it? Like, what are the assumptions we should be thinking about here? What don't we know that we want to find out about? Um, all of those questions that are in pulling new information or at least unearthing known information so that we're all having the same conversation. Gary, you got a story about
I
this one, I
do.
think.
And as soon as you
Yeah,
said assumption, it made me think about this story. A
yeah,
client of ours, large consumer brand company, they had just taken over, and they're seeing all these meetings, meeting after meetings happening, weekly team coffees, informal check-ins, small gatherings, holding the group in a way, and they go, we don't need any of this. Like we're gonna scrap these things, okay? And before long, they started to notice that it had a countervailing effect on the team, on the group, on the company, because what somebody failed to ask that professor question that you may have asked, John, which is, you know why what is this holding for us? How do these meetings hold for the company and what do they do? Right? And because the answer would have been they hold our culture and the way in which we communicate and thinking of them as non-productive because they weren't task oriented, but they were relationship oriented. And a culture needs both of those things to thrive.
I mean, we've all seen that and saw some version of that post COVID, right? There's like, oh, suddenly it became challenging to do those things and create that stuff, and so that, in some ways there was a learning about that exact topic without having to ask the question. We just discovered it. Um, the thing about professor that I notice as I'm working with clients is that um, this preference, or let me say it the other way, this readiness thing we talked about letting go of knowing, or at least pretending to let go of knowing, if you're on the cycle there, um, is actually an emotional experience. If you think about Jonathan Haidt's the idea of the elephant and the rider, and the elephant being the internal, intuitive, emotion-centered part of your brain, happens first, right? So being able to sort of let that happen uh, so that you can sort of allow yourself to notice, oh, I've got a preference for the way that this wants to go. And that as I, learn this model and started to apply it, being able to sort of just notice my own emotional reaction to, oh, I'm either resisting that idea automatically or attracted to that idea. Being able to start to notice that helped me broaden what was possible in my professional questions. Um, let's talk about the next one, Gary. Let's talk about innovator. This is your sweet spot and what you love to do with clients individually, of course. But let's talk about your examples of this one?
Um, Trying to think, you'd think that being the person, this would be my sweet spot, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Of it. Um, I think with the innovator, what happens is you really move to action quickly,
Mm.
right? And so somebody coming in, they're inspiring because it's like we don't need the details. We don't need to get clogged down with the different steps. And it's like moving right to action. So, the examples here are what would you do if time and budget were unlimited? Right. And people start answering, and the person with the innovator style just goes, okay, then let's do
Great.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen that happen with us?
Yeah, for sure. You all the time. What else could we do? How about let's try it this way? What other things could we do to make this happen? And actually, in some ways, there's a kind of yes and with an innovator series of questions, right? It's like classic improv. If you're familiar with improv comedy or improvisational acting, is like this sort of ability to sort of think outside the proverbial box by expanding what's possible through the conversation. And the sort of beauty of that is that often you're doing it in a way, in my experience, to try to remove barriers, right? So that off, I guess, without realizing it, many of us have constructed artificial limiting belief barriers about what's possible when we think about a business we're working with, or a client and what they're up to. So innovator style, it kind of invites, hey, let's blow that barrier up, which of course means acknowledging there is a barrier. Go ahead, Gary. Yeah.
It's such a attractive way for people who are trying to gather information from the organization. So I'm thinking of this time where a consultant went in and, did the interview and stuff, but it was their last question, which was like, if this were your company, what would you do?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So perspective and action.
Action. What would you
And
do? Yeah.
and it got so many great ideas, and the leader's like, "Wow, this is fabulous." So think about this from a leadership standpoint, that when leaders often feel frustrated that people aren't coming to them, and that has to do with trust and hierarchy and all that. But when you ask questions like this, it stirs people in a way that gives them permission to reveal what they weren't revealing before.
And because both professor and innovator are adding more perspectives, they are essentially divergent, right? They're adding more possibilities. And there's this old, I guess, real maybe story about uh, Einstein saying, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 58 minutes trying to figure out what the problem was, and then 2 minutes coming up with an answer, right? A solution. Well, what he's really saying, if you think about this peak models, I would spend the vast majority of my time in professor and innovator mode, right? Maybe 70, 80% of my time diverging, because I want as many good ideas on the table before I make a decision. And then finally, I'm going to go to judgment. I'm going to start to
Zoom in.
converge towards a solution. And the first step in that is to sort of look at all the ideas, or look at all the stuff in front of us, and try to rate it. So that takes us, to, of course, to judge. What are the most important things for us here? How will we decide effectively? What are the parts of this that we should be considering as we make this decision? Who will have the best? Who will this have the most impact on?
And
Um,
I think it's important, John, to remember that uh, we're using labels, and
yeah.
sometimes the label judge
Mm.
doesn't carry a good label with it.
Yeah, it's
Um,
potentially negative.
right? It can become pejorative, and people think of it as negative. But what I do is I often think of, who do I know who ask questions in this way? My business partner was this dominant. And when I need to go there because of what you said, which is if I go cross diagonally, I widen the questions across all four quadrants. So I think of what Rick would ask, and it immediately comes to mind. I do not have to think about the patterns or any of that. I just think, what would Rick ask here? And I immediately come to questions like, what's the most important consideration here? Which of these matter most and why? And what does the evidence actually say? Right? Because he would act, he was a trained lawyer. So, it actually comes naturally to him,
Yeah,
or at
yeah,
least
totally.
trained to him.
And side note, you can do this in all four quadrants. It's probably useful for you to have a person in your life that you can appreciate that they're good at it. And I certainly use the what would Gary say here? And I'm going to get some innovator questions. I absolutely do that. It happens all the time.
Yes,
Um,
Professor John.
yeah, right. Okay, so when we go to that sorting and we sort of get to the judgment kinds of questions, like what are we gonna how are we gonna rank this, rate this? How will we decide what's more important about this? What impacts are we trying to manage for? Ultimately, we will begin converging to a single choice, which then will very naturally, if you follow this progression, lead us to some directure style questions. Okay, how can we best use our resources? What's the next step we will take, right? Who owns it? Who's going to do it and by when? And our classic example internally to CO2 is, of course, Mackenzie, our COO, who is exceptionally good at director questions. She's so good at it that when she was stepped away from that role for a while for us, we were just seemingly floating in space. There was a good chunk of time where we're like, man, we're really missing Mackenzie. And what we were almost certainly in meetings missing was Mackenzie's ability to get to the point. We are not doing this. Let's do it this way. What will we do? Who's doing it? Etc.
It
Yeah.
was so apparent yesterday we were having a meeting, and
Yeah.
she kept bringing us back, and it was so needed. And the thing to remember is all of these are needed, right?
Yeah. Right.
It's the completeness of the model that helps. It's not just one side. So whenever we feel that we're just in one place, that's when we know we should be expanding ourselves out in how we ask the questions. So it's not only more questions, it's the right questions where we can go deeper with whatever the topic is, the context or the person.
Go back to the but yes, and this point to make just for everybody, most of us are living in a place where we're only using 25% of our possible questions, right? So asking a better one along the way. Before we get to another set of stories or whatever, can you just go back to the graphic with all four for a second on the screen? Yeah, there you go. So one just final note here is even just having this in front of you, right? Just the four box with the Z reminder. Just as a leader in a context where you are finding yourself trying to solve a complex situation. Again, let's assume for a minute you've done the readiness work to say, okay, I can at least pretend I don't know the answer, right? And I trust the person or people I'm working with enough to invite more answers into the room. Just asking yourself, which style is going to be most helpful for the situation we're in right now? Do we need more perspective or more evaluation? Do we need more action or more information? And if we do that, often you can just start with like, okay, we should probably start with Innovator. Okay, what else should we do here? What else could we do? Is the right way to say that. And what are the things we haven't considered to do yet? Finding yourself the box to just live there for a minute and sort of essentially force yourself into we'll call it the space that is needed for the context you're in. You're going to find yourself just coming up with much better solutions. Also, more buy-in and more accountability. And I know you wanted to talk a little bit more about that, sort of how that asking the right question can help people stay more committed, be more accountable to sort of being on the hook
Yeah,
for the solution.
well, it feels really important in today's
Mhm.
world because we hear over and over um, how often people aren't um, held accountable.
Yeah.
And it's there's a kind of a permission tax that happens, right?
Mhm.
And the permission tax goes like this. Um, um, I go ask you, you're my boss, and I go ask you or tell you what I'm thinking about doing.
Mhm.
And with that, I'm really asking for permission, even though I'm not speaking it that way. And I'm hoping that you're going to say that's a great idea, or you should go do this. The moment you do that, there's a permission tax because there's a drag on the organization. Because the first drag was I went to you and I didn't need to. It's in my job description to do the thing that I'm supposed to be deciding to do.
Mhm.
But I
Mhm.
go to you to get your wisdom and ideas. So you ask a bunch of questions, but you do not say, well, Gary, um, that's just a great idea because that moment you've hit the permission tax, right? So you're on the hook.
Mhm.
You've taken it as soon as you said it's a great idea. And this comes out in management classes at school, which is be positive, be affirming. But the mistake is to know when to do that. The when to do that is when it's the outcome has happened.
Right.
So
Not before they've done it.
right. So you're my boss. I go away and you haven't said that to me. You've said something like, Gare, it looks like you know exactly what you're going to do. I look forward to seeing it. And I try everything I can to get it from you, what you would do, and you don't give. And when I leave, I feel anxious. I feel uncomfortable. I feel like I am on the hook for this.
Mhm.
And that is when you move from like the singular asking of a question
Mhm.
to getting it to be more cultural and collective
Yeah.
with a team, because all of a sudden the team is starting to feel this ownership that comes from asking the right question at the right time and giving no answer, which is so uncomfortable for both sides, the permission giver and the permission seeker,
Mhm.
right? And it becomes, you can either get it to be a virtuous cycle or a vicious cycle as you go.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell this example that, and as it relates to peak, we should just map it for a minute, right? Like my first, I don't know, month working with CO2, Gary presents me with this opportunity. I go do the sort of discovery session to talk about it. Comes back, they're very interested. Please give us a proposal. I start to put the proposal together and show it to Gary, and he says, "Okay, so what are you thinking about this?" Some sort of professor question, right? And I'm like, "Well, I'm good. I'm excited. It sounds like they're interested. This feels like the right move. I'm very confident I can help them. And well, okay, John, what else do you need to do here to get this ready to go?" Innovator question, right? There's a classic. The big thing, I think I probably need to figure out how much to charge. Gary says, "Well, how much should you charge?" Back to judge, right? And I said, "Well, I thought you would tell me how much to charge. Because, by the way, this affects you too, as a guy who's going to make a big chunk of this money. Wouldn't you tell me how much to charge?" "Well, of course not, John. That would be ridiculous." And I don't remember exactly how you said it, but I know there was a series of um, innovator and judge back and forth questions about, well, how much is standard in the industry, judge, right? What are all the ways you could think about charging this innovator? And back and forth until finally it became clear that you were absolutely not going to give me a number.
Yeah.
And that was uncomfortable for both
It's
of us.
it's incredibly uncomfortable. Like I clearly knew a number in my head. Like, and this is what when we were talking earlier about like um if you can't get there all the way, I don't know. Just get to I may know, but I'm not going to say, right? And because sometimes you just have to go there because you go, oh, I it happened the other day. Mac and I were talking about something, and she actually knew I wasn't going to ask, so she didn't keep asking for permission at all. She said she started with, "I know this is my decision. I just want you to ask me the questions that you have in your mind," and that's what we did. And I gave no leading indicators about uh, what the decision was. Um, and it was very, I think, satisfying to both of us in the end because we knew what we were doing and talking about.
Yeah, and I can speak to that and I'm sure this would be the same for Mac in her early days working with you. But uh, for as uncomfortable and frustrating as that was to begin with, it absolutely served me, right? I was absolutely a stronger consultant. I had to do the wrestling, the mental work myself. I had to sort of think through what's important about that and how I was going to feel with that versus, well, they said no because I charged too much. I get to make up. And that must have been Gary's fault because he gave me a number, right? And, all of that is uh, worth just noticing because I was owning it. In other words, I was on the hook to use that reference, which, by the way, we will be talking about in a later LinkedIn Live at some point. So that's good news. Um, for the sake of this audience, I'm just inviting us to notice that there's so much about this that can feel like it's a lot. And I want to just bring it back to the sort of most simple thing here, right? Let's just start with readiness. If you're leading other people or working in a consultative environment, right? The first step is to just notice, can I let go of knowing, right? Can I at the very least pretend that I can let go of knowing? And do I trust and can I work on trusting the people in my orbit enough to allow the answers to come from them, or at least outside of yourself? Can I do that work?
And I'm just going to, a little note on that one, which
Yep.
is the person doesn't have to be not trustworthy for you not to trust them. The trust
Mm.
issue may be yours and have
Mm.
nothing at all to do with them. And I find that over and over
So
that
give us an example of that so we can hear that out loud.
I've learned, I'm making this up. I've learned that I just don't trust people around issues around character.
Mm.
And so if I was to check boxes of what I trust and don't trust, this whole line of character would be a thing. But that's around me. That's something I learned somewhere along the lines. And
Yeah.
therefore, I don't trust anybody on that subject, on that
Mm.
context around trust. And
Mm.
so then I don't trust them, and therefore I don't ask them the question because what's the point? You know,
Mm.
I can't trust what they're going to say because it's all about them. You know, it's going to be self-serving or something like
Mm.
that. So why bother? Why
Instead, I'll
bother
just
asking?
keep coming with the answer.
Right. And
Yes.
so the investigation is, and I'm not going to go into detail, but we have like these 7 C's of trust.
Mhm.
And with those, it's trying to figure out, is there a pattern for you that you don't trust people in? Because that would be an easier solution to trusting others than having all these people that report to you solve that. Because no matter what they do, it will not solve it within you.
Yeah, I think to your point, as an individual leader, you can do a lot more for trust by investigating your own bias and blind spots than you can from deciding or trying to figure out which of the people around you are trustworthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, good.
But if you have an executive team and you go, or a senior team and you say, hey, I trust 6 out of 7. Okay, then you got some real work to do. You have to do repair with
Yeah.
that person because that person is creating issues for the entire team, even if the trust issue is just yours with them, right? And you really have to do the hard work to either repair it or move on
Yeah.
because it's going to have an effect on that entire team as long as because you can't show up in the leader model that you want. So if you want to become a leader that asks questions, and you always have that one person in the way,
Mm.
it's going to be an issue.
Yeah. And with that, we are going to bring it to a close because Murphy looks like she ready to go.
Again.
And so I'll finish this point with first of all, thanks for everybody for being here. We had so much fun talking about this. I had so much fun talking about this with you, Gary, as always. More to come. Likely, we will revisit peak future LinkedIn lives because there's just so much to dig in here. We probably do one for each of these four categories. I did just try to simplify it. Readiness. Can I let go of knowing? At least pretend not to know. And can I do the mental and internal work to start to trust the people I'm working with? Once I've done that, the only other step here is just as you're starting to look at that framework, think about what kind of question would most serve the context we're in now. If you can just ask yourself that question, what kind of question will serve this situation we're in? Is it better to have a professor question where we're looking for knowledge and perspective? Is it a innovator question where we're looking for perspectives around actions? Is it a judge question where we have plenty of actions to do and we're just trying to figure out what are the right ones? And finally, is it about just getting right to what will we do? And if you think about that Z framing, it won't hurt at all to start up in the upper left and move across down and then to the right. So thanks so much, Gary. Last words for the audience before we close it out.
Success is never a solo act. So ask the questions and bring other people in.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Bye.